The throne room of the Volanthi Empire stretched for half a mile. Pillars of black crystal rose toward a ceiling that showed the stars themselves. Thousands of alien nobles stood in perfect rows, their pale skin glowing softly under the light of 3 moons that shone through the massive windows dot at the far end. On a throne carved from a single piece of purple gemstone sat Empress Sithara Velkith. She was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful. Her skin was white like fresh snow, and beneath it, her veins glowed with violet light. This was the mark of royal blood. For 12,000 years, her family had ruled this empire. They controlled 1,000 worlds and 1,000,000 ships. They had never known defeat. Today was a celebration. The last free human world had fallen. Earth, that small blue planet in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, had finally bent its knee. The war had taken 3 years longer than expected. The humans had fought with a fury that surprised everyone. But in the end, they were just another primitive species. They fell like all the others. "Bring in the tribute," Sithara commanded. Her voice was cold and clear like ice breaking. The great doors opened. Volanthi soldiers marched in, dragging chains behind them. Connected to those chains were humans, men and women from Earth, captured and brought across the stars as gifts for the Empress. They would serve as slaves, as entertainers, as curiosities for the noble houses. Sithara watched them with mild interest. They were so small compared to the Volanthi, who stood 8 feet tall on average. Their skin came in strange shades of brown and pink. They had no bioluminescence, no psychic abilities, no natural weapons. It was amazing they had survived on their own world at all. One human caught her attention. He walked differently from the others. While most of the captives kept their heads down in fear or shame, this one walked with his back straight and his eyes forward. He was covered in scars. One long mark ran from his forehead down across his blind left eye. His hands were rough and calloused. He looked like a man who had spent his whole life fighting. "That one," Sithara said, pointing with one long finger. "Who is he?" Her chief advisor, a old Volanthi named Korath, checked his data tablet. "Commander Marcus Cole, Your Majesty." He led the defense of the human capital city. It took 600 soldiers to capture him alive. He killed 43 of our warriors before he fell. A murmur went through the crowd. 43 Volanthi killed by a single human with no weapons? It seemed impossible. "Bring him closer," the Empress ordered. The guards dragged Marcus forward until he stood at the base of the throne steps. He looked up at Sithara without fear. His one good eye was dark brown, and there was something in it that made the Empress uncomfortable. It was not hate. It was not despair. It was patience. The look of a predator waiting for the right moment. "Do you know why you are here, human?" Sithara asked. "To be a trophy," Marcus replied. His voice was rough from screaming orders in battle. "A pet for you to show off." Several nobles gasped at his disrespect. A guard raised his weapon to strike him, but Sithara raised her hand. "You speak boldly for a slave," she said. "I am not a slave," Marcus answered. "You can chain my body. You cannot chain what I am." Sithara felt something strange, a tiny spark of interest. In 12,000 years, countless species have been conquered by her empire. All of them had broken eventually. All of them had learned to bow. But this human, this scarred and beaten soldier from a primitive world, stood before the most powerful being in the galaxy and refused to bend. "We shall see," she said softly. "Take him to the holding cells. I will decide his fate later." The guards pulled Marcus away. As he walked, he turned his head and looked back at the Empress one more time. That patient look was still in his eye. It stayed with Sithara long after he was gone. The celebration continued. Dancers performed. Musicians played strange instruments that created sounds beyond human hearing. The nobles drank and laughed and congratulated themselves on another successful conquest. Sithara sat on her throne and accepted their praise, but her mind kept returning to the scarred human. 3 hours later, the attack came. The first sign was silence. The music stopped. Sithara looked up and saw that the musicians had fallen, thin needles sticking from their necks. Then the screams began. Figures in black dropped from the ceiling. They moved faster than normal Volanti, their bodies enhanced with illegal technology. Assassins from the Cult of Purity, a fanatic group that believed the royal family had grown weak. They wanted to install their own leader on the throne. The guards rushed to protect the Empress, but the assassins cut through them like water through sand. These were not ordinary killers. They had been trained since birth for this moment. Within seconds, a dozen royal guards lay dead. Sithara rose from her throne and called upon her psychic abilities. She sent a wave of mental energy at the nearest assassin, stopping his heart. But there were too many. For everyone she killed, 3 more took his place. They pushed closer and closer to the throne. Then one of them raised a plasma pistol and aimed it at her heart. Time seemed to slow down. Sithara saw the assassin's finger tighten on the trigger. She knew she could not move fast enough. After 12,000 years, her bloodline was about to end. A shape flew through the air. Marcus Cole, still wearing his chains, slammed into the assassin from the side. They crashed to the ground together. The plasma bolt went wide, burning a hole in the ceiling instead of the Empress's chest. Marcus wrapped his chains around the assassin's throat and pulled until he heard a crack. 2 more assassins turned toward him. Marcus moved faster than any human should be able to move. He grabbed a fallen guard's blade and threw it with perfect accuracy into the first assassin's eye. The second assassin swung at him, but Marcus ducked under the blow and drove his elbow into the alien's throat. As the assassin choked, Marcus took his weapon and killed him with it. The last assassin, the leader, stared at the human in disbelief. "Impossible," he whispered. "You are nothing but a primitive." Marcus smiled. It was not a kind smile. "We primitives are full of surprises." He charged. The assassin raised his blade to block, but Marcus was already past his guard. The human's fist connected with the assassin's face, with enough force to shatter bone. The leader fell and did not rise again. The throne room fell silent. Everyone stared at the human standing among the bodies of elite assassins. He was breathing hard, and blood dripped from cuts on his arms and face. But he was alive, and the Empress was alive because of him. Sithara stepped down from her throne for the first time in 50 years. She walked through the carnage until she stood before Marcus. He looked up at her, that patient look replaced with something else. Exhaustion, perhaps, or acceptance of whatever came next. "You saved my life," Sithara said. The words felt strange in her mouth. No inferior species had ever saved a Volanti royal. It had never happened in the entire history of the Empire. "Seemed like the right thing to do," Marcus replied. Karath rushed to the Empress's side. "Your Majesty, the ancient laws are clear. He has performed the Velther. He has saved royal blood at the risk of his own life. You owe him a life debt." The nobles whispered in shock. A life debt to a human? It was unthinkable, but the law was the law. It had stood for 12,000 years. Not even the Empress could break it. Sithara looked at the scarred human who had just changed everything. She did not know whether to be grateful or furious. Perhaps both. "So be it," she said quietly. "The debt is acknowledged." Marcus Cole, prisoner and slave, had just become the only human in history to hold power over the Volanti Empress. And neither of them understood yet how much that single moment would change the galaxy forever. 3 weeks had passed since the assassination attempt. The palace had been cleaned of blood and bodies. The cult of purity had gone into hiding. Life returned to normal for everyone except Empress Sithara, who could not stop thinking about the human who had saved her. Marcus Cole had been moved from the prison cells to a guest chamber. It was small by Volanthi standards, but larger than any room he had ever lived in on Earth. He had been given clean clothes, good food, and medical care for his wounds. The chains were gone, but he was still not free. Sithara visited him on the third day. She told herself it was simply to discuss the life debt, nothing more. She found him standing by the window, looking out at the purple sky of her homeworld. "You have not tried to escape," she said. Marcus did not turn around. "Where would I go? My ship is destroyed. My planet is occupied. My soldiers are either dead or enslaved. Running would be pointless. Most prisoners would try anyway. I am not most prisoners." He finally turned to face her. The cut above his eye had healed into another scar. "Why are you here, Empress?" Sithara was not used to being questioned. She was used to giving orders and having them obeyed without thought. But something about this human made her want to answer honestly. "I do not understand you," she admitted. "You had every reason to let me die. My empire destroyed your world. My soldiers killed your people. Yet you risked your life to save mine. Why?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "Because hate is a chain heavier than anything your guards put on me. I have seen what it does to people. It eats them from inside until nothing is left. I refuse to let that happen to me." Sithara had lived for 300 years. She had studied 1,000 philosophies and mastered dozens of sciences. But she had never heard anyone speak like this human. His words were simple, but they carried a weight she could not ignore. "The life debt," she said, changing the subject. "I am prepared to grant you whatever you wish. A ship, wealth, a planet of your own to rule. Name your price, and it will be yours." Marcus shook his head. "I do not want any of those things." "Then what do you want?" He looked at her with his one good eye. "I want to know why. Why did your empire attack Earth? We were no threat to you. We have barely started exploring our own solar system. We did not even know aliens existed until your ships appeared in our sky. So why? What did we do to deserve this?" It was a simple question. It should have had a simple answer. But Sithara found herself unable to speak. The truth was, she did not know. The order to conquer Earth had come from the Elder Council, a group of ancient Volanthi who advised the throne. They had called humanity a potential threat, but they had never explained why. "I will find out," she said finally. "You have my word." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then that is what I want. The truth." Over the following days, Sithara began her investigation. She requested access to sealed records from the time of Earth's conquest. The Elder Council refused. She demanded the information as Empress. They told her some secrets were above even the throne. This only made her more determined that she began spending time with Marcus. At first, she told herself it was only to inform him of her progress. But slowly, those meetings became something more. She found herself curious about human culture, human history, human ways of thinking. Marcus told her about Earth. He described oceans so vast they could swallow entire Volanthi continents. He spoke of forests and deserts and mountains capped with snow. He talked about art and music and stories that humans had created over thousands of years. He told her about love and loss and hope and dreams. Sithara listened to everything. The Volanthi were an ancient and powerful race, but they had lost something along the way. They did not create art anymore. They did not tell stories. They did not dream. Their civilization had become perfect and cold, like a machine that had forgotten why it was built. "How do you do it?" she asked one night. They were sitting in her private garden. surrounded by flowers that glowed in the darkness. How do you hold on to hope when everything has been taken from you? Marcus picked one of the glowing flowers and held it gently, because giving up would mean they won. The Volanthi took my planet, my people, my freedom. If I let them take my hope too, then there is nothing left of me. As long as I keep hoping, I am still fighting. Sithara reached out and touched his hand. It was warm. Volanthi skin was always cold, a product of their biology. But human skin held heat like a living fire. The sensation shocked her. She had never felt warmth like this before. Marcus did not pull away. He turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that for a long time, saying nothing. A week later, Sithara finally found what she was looking for. Hidden deep in the most restricted section of the Imperial Archives was a file sealed by the Elder Council 10,000 years ago. It took all her authority and 3 broken laws to access it, but she finally held the truth in her hands. She read it alone in her chambers. When she finished, the tablet fell from her shaking fingers and cracked on the floor. The reason for Earth conquest was not because humanity was weak. It was because humanity was dangerous. Not now, but in the future. The Volanthi had technology that could predict the potential of a species. They had used it on hundreds of alien races over the millennia. Most species showed limited potential. They would develop to a certain point and then stop. But humans were different. Their genetic code was unlike anything the Volanthi had ever seen. It was adaptive. It was evolving at a rate thousands of times faster than any other known species. The models predicted that within a few thousand years, humanity would surpass the Volanthi. Within 10,000 years, they would become something beyond comprehension. The Elder Council had not conquered Earth to gain slaves or resources. They had done it to stop humanity from becoming gods. Sithara found Marcus in his chamber and showed him the file. He read it 3 times to make sure he understood. They were afraid of us, he said quietly. All that power, all those ships, all those soldiers. And they were afraid of one small planet. Your potential is unlimited, Sithara replied. Given enough time, there is no telling what your species could become. The council decided it was safer to stop you now than risk facing you later. Marcus laughed. It was a bitter sound. So much death. So much suffering. All because of what we might become someday. Sithara sat beside him on the bed. She had never been this close to him before. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. Her own cold skin seemed to drink it in. I am sorry, she said. I know those words mean nothing, but I am sorry. Marcus looked at her. Something had changed in his eye. The patience was still there, but there was something else now. Something softer. You are not your empire, he said. You are not the Elder Council. You are just you. And you are the first person in this galaxy who has treated me like a man instead of an animal. He reached up and touched her face. His fingers were warm against her cold cheek. Sithara closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. 300 years of loneliness seemed to melt away in that single moment. This is forbiddance, she whispered. If anyone knew... I know, Marcus replied. I do not care. Neither did she. Not anymore. That night, Empress Sithara made a choice that would shake the foundations of her empire. She initiated the Velshar, the sacred bonding ritual reserved only for royal unions. It had never been performed with an outsider. It had certainly never been performed with a human, but as she lay in Marcus's arms, feeling his warmth spread through her cold body for the first time in her long life, Sithara knew she would not change her decision, even if she could. She had finally found something worth more than an empire. She had found someone who made her feel alive. The morning sun rose over the palace, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. Sithara woke slowly, her body feeling different in ways she could not explain. Something had changed inside her. Something fundamental. Marcus slept beside her, his breathing slow and peaceful. She watched him for a long moment. His face, so rough and scarred in waking hours, looked almost gentle in sleep. She reached out and touched his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. Then she felt something else. A flutter. Deep inside her own body, something moved. Sithara sat up quickly, her hand going to her stomach. The Velshar bonding ritual was supposed to be symbolic. It created a spiritual connection between two Volanthi souls. It was never meant to create physical offspring outside of specific medical procedures. Yet somehow, impossibly, she knew she was carrying a child. A human Volanthi child. Over the next few days, she kept the secret to herself. She ran medical scans in private, using equipment from her personal quarters so no one else would know. The results confirmed her suspicions. The child growing inside her was something that had never existed before. Its genetic structure was neither human nor Volanthi, but a perfect blend of both. The scans also showed something else. Something that made her hands tremble. The child's potential rating was off the scale. The same technology that had predicted humanity's frightening future showed readings for this single embryo that the computer could not even measure. The symbols simply showed infinity. Sithara finally told Marcus on the 7th day. They were walking in her private garden, hidden from view by walls of flowering trees. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Can you feel it?" she asked. Marcus frowned in confusion. Then his expression changed. His eye went wide. "That is not possible," he said. "We are different species. The biology alone should have prevented this," Sithara agreed. "But your species adapts to everything. Apparently, even to us." Marcus stared at her stomach as if he could see through her skin to the life forming beneath. "What does this mean? For the child? For you?" "I do not know." Sithara placed her hand over his. "No one has ever done this before. There are no records, no guidelines, no predictions. We are walking into unknown territory." For the first time since she had known him, Marcus looked afraid. Not for himself, she realized. For her. For their child. "The Elder Council," he said. "If they find out, they will call for my execution. The bloodline would be declared corrupted. Everything I am, everything my family built over 12,000 years would be erased. Then we run. Tonight, I do not care about empires or thrones. I care about you and our child." Sithara shook her head. "Running is not possible. I am tracked every moment of every day. There was no place in this galaxy where we could hide. And even if there was, the Empire would hunt us until we were found. Then what do we do?" She pulled him close and rested her head on his shoulder. "We prepare. We gather allies. And when the truth comes out, we fight." They had 3 months before the pregnancy became visible. Sithara used that time wisely. She reached out to nobles who owed her favors, officers who were loyal to her personally, rather than to the Elder Council. She discovered that discontent had been growing in the Empire for centuries. Many believed the Council had grown too powerful, too secretive, too obsessed with genetic purity. Marcus helped her understand how to inspire people. "Tell them the truth," he advised. "Not all of it, not yet, but enough. Tell them you want to build an empire that values growth over tradition, that looks forward instead of backward. Give them something to believe in." Sithara followed his advice. She gave speeches. She visited distant worlds that had not seen an empress in generations. She listened to the complaints of common Volanthi who had been ignored by the ruling class for too long. Slowly, support began to build. Then the Elder Council made their move. High Priest Vorath, appeared at the palace with 100 armed guards and a warrant for the Empress's arrest. Someone had leaked information about the pregnancy. The council had declared Sithara a traitor to her race and named Varth as regent until a new leader could be found. Sithara stood in the throne room as Voreth read the charges. Marcus was beside her, his jaw tight with anger. 200 of her loyal guards stood between them and Voreth's forces. "You have violated the most sacred laws of our people," Voreth declared. His voice echoed off the crystal pillars. "You have contaminated the royal bloodline with primitive genetic material. You have endangered everything our ancestors built. For these crimes, you are sentenced to death. The abomination growing inside you will be destroyed." "The only abomination I see is you," Sithara replied. Her voice was calm, but her violet veins pulsed with barely contained fury. "You speak of purity and tradition, but all you truly care about is power. You have been trying to control the throne for centuries. This is just the excuse you were waiting for. The law is clear. You cannot deny what you have done." "I deny nothing." Sithara placed her hand on her stomach. "Yes, I carry a child. Yes, the father is human. And yes, I would make the same choice again 1,000 times over. Because this child is not a contamination. This child is evolution. This child is the future." Voreth laughed coldly. "The future? You carry nothing but a mistake. A freak that should never have existed." Marcus stepped forward. His hands clenched into fists. "Call my child a freak one more time, and I will teach you what humans do to those who threaten their families." "Silence, animal." Voreth gestured to his guards. "Take them both." The guards advanced. Sithara's loyalists drew their weapons. For a long, terrible moment, everyone stood frozen on the edge of violence. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "Stand down." Admiral Kestrel entered through a side door, followed by 30 officers in fleet uniforms. He was one of the oldest military commanders in the Empire, a legend who had won 100 battles. His word carried more weight than most nobles. "Admiral," Varus said carefully, "this does not concern the military. Everything concerning the Empress concerns the military. I have sworn an oath to protect her. That oath does not change because of who she chooses to love or what child she carries. You would defy the Elder Council?" Kestrel drew his ceremonial blade. "I would die for my Empress. And so would every officer who followed me here. The question is whether you are willing to start a civil war over a pregnancy." Vareth's face twisted with rage. He looked at his guards, then at the growing number of military officers filling the room. The calculation was clear. He did not have enough forces to win today. "This is not over," he hissed. "The council will not rest until the bloodline is cleansed." "Then the council should prepare for war," Sithara replied. Voreth swept out of the throne room with his guards following behind. The moment he was gone, Sithara allowed herself to sag against Marcus. The confrontation had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit. "He will be back," she said. "With more soldiers. With more ships. We just delayed the inevitable. Then we make sure we are ready when he returns." Marcus held her close. "Your people believe in you. I believe in you. We will find a way through this." Over the following weeks, the Empire split apart. Half the fleet declared for Vareth and the Elder Council. Half remained loyal to Sithara. Worlds chose sides. Families were torn apart. The largest civil war in Volanthi history had begun. Sithara commanded her forces from the palace, her pregnancy growing larger every day. She refused to hide, refused to show weakness. Her presence in the command center became a symbol of strength. The Empress who would not run. The mother who would fight for her child. Marcus stood beside her through every battle. He had no military training in space warfare, but he understood strategy in ways the Volanti did not. He thought differently. He found solutions that no one else could see. Slowly, the tide of battle began to turn, but the war was far from over, and the greatest challenges were yet to come. The war had lasted 8 months. 8 months of burning ships and dying soldiers. 8 months of planets changing hands and families being destroyed. 8 months that had left the Volanti Empire bleeding from 1,000 wounds. Sithara stood in the command center of her last stronghold, watching the tactical display with tired eyes. Her stomach was huge now, the child inside her only weeks away from birth. She should have been resting. The doctors had begged her to stay in bed. But she could not rest. Not when everything she loved was about to be destroyed. The display showed the truth she could not escape. Voreth's fleet surrounded the system. 3,000 warships against the remaining 400. Her forces had fought bravely, but one by one, her allies had fallen. Now only this single world remained under her control. The last piece of territory loyal to the true Empress. "We cannot win this battle," Admiral Kestrel said quietly. He stood beside her, his face lined with exhaustion. "We can make them pay. We can hurt them badly. But in the end, they will overwhelm us. I know." Sithara placed her hand on her stomach. The child moved beneath her touch, restless and full of energy. "How long?" "Voreth will give the attack order within the hour. He wants to end this before you give birth. He knows the child will become a symbol if it is born." Marcus entered the command center. He had been checking on the ground defenses, making sure the soldiers were ready for what was coming. His face was grim, but his eyes still held that patient fire that had first attracted Sithara to him. "The troops are prepared," he reported. "They will fight to the last. But they need something to believe in. They need hope." "What hope can I give them?" Sithara asked. "We are surrounded, outnumbered, outgunned. The mathematics of this battle cannot be changed." Marcus took her hand, then changed something else. "You are not just a military leader. You are an empress. You have power that has nothing to do with ships or soldiers. My psychic abilities are nothing compared to what we face. I could kill a few hundred enemies at most. It would not change the outcome, not on your own." Marcus placed his other hand on her stomach. "But you are not alone anymore. Neither of us is." Sithara stared at him. Then she understood what he was suggesting. The child inside her carried both Volanti psionic potential and human adaptive genetics. The medical scans had shown readings that went beyond measurement. What if those readings were not just predictions of future ability? What if that power could be accessed now? "It is too dangerous," she said. "We do not know what would happen. We know what will happen if we do nothing. Voreth wins. We die. Our child dies. Everything we fought for disappears." Marcus's grip tightened on her hand. "I am not saying this will work. I am saying it is the only chance we have." Alarms blared throughout the command center. The tactical display updated. Voreth's fleet was moving. The final assault had begun. Sithara made her decision. She walked to the center of the command platform, where a meditation circle had been built for royal psionic practices. She lowered herself to the floor, sitting cross-legged despite her advanced pregnancy. Marcus knelt beside her. "Clear the room," she ordered. Everyone except Marcus. Admiral Kestrel hesitated, then nodded. The command staff filed out, leaving the two of them alone with the blaring alarms and the display showing doom approaching. Sithara closed her eyes. She reached deep inside herself, past her own thoughts and feelings, down to the tiny consciousness growing within her. The child was awake. The child was aware. And the child was afraid. "It is all right," Sithara whispered to her unborn daughter. She did not know how she knew it was a daughter, but she did. "Mother is here," Father is here. We are going to protect you. She felt a response. Not words, but emotions. Trust. Love. And underneath them, power. Vast, limitless power waiting to be released. Sithara opened herself to that power. She let it flow through her like a river breaking through a dam. Her violet veins began to glow brighter than they ever had before. The light spread across her skin until her entire body was shining. Marcus watched in awe as the woman he loved transformed before his eyes. This was not just Volanthi's psionic ability. This was something new. Something that had never existed in the universe before. Sithara reached out with her mind. But instead of attacking the enemy fleet, she did something unexpected. She connected. To every mind in the system. To every soldier on both sides. To Vorath himself, sitting in his command chair with a triumphant smile on his face. And then she showed them the truth. She broadcasted the sealed files from the Imperial archives. She let everyone see what the Elder Council had hidden for 10,000 years. The predictions about humanity. The fear that had driven the conquest of Earth. The lie that had been used to justify genocide. But she did not stop there. She also showed them something else. Memories from human minds across the galaxy. The beauty of Earth before the invasion. The love humans felt for their families. The hope they carried even in the darkest times. The dream of a future where all species could live together in peace. The psionic broadcast hit every mind in the system like a tidal wave. On both sides, soldiers stopped fighting. Officers stared at their displays without seeing them. Even Vorath was frozen, his smile gone, his face pale with shock. "You were afraid of us," Sithara said, her voice echoing in every mind. "You conquered Earth because you could not bear the thought of another species surpassing you. But you were wrong about what we are. We are not enemies. We are partners. We are family." She turned her focus to Vorath specifically. "You see my child as a contamination, a mistake. But look at what she can do. Look at the power flowing through me right now. This is not corruption. This is evolution. This is what happens when two species choose love instead of fear." Vorath tried to break free of the psionic hold. His mind thrashed against Sithra's power like a fish caught in a net. "You are proving our point," he snarled. "This power is exactly what we were afraid of. A human Volanthi hybrid could destroy everything, could rule the galaxy as a tyrant." "She could," Sithara agreed. "But she will not, because she will be raised by two parents who love her. She will learn compassion from her father and responsibility from her mother. Power is not evil. What matters is how it is used." Across the system, minds began to shift. Soldiers who had been ready to die for Vorath's cause suddenly questioned why they were fighting. Officers who had believed in genetic purity realized the belief was based on lies. Slowly, ships began to lower their weapons. "This war is over," Sithara declared. "Any who wish to continue fighting may do so. But know that you fight for a lie. You fight for old men who were too afraid to let the universe grow beyond their control." One by one, Vorath's ships signaled surrender. Captains contacted Sithra's command center, pledging their loyalty to the true Empress. Within an hour, only a handful of vessels remained loyal to the Elder Council. When they saw they stood alone, even they powered down their weapons. Vorath was taken into custody without resistance. He sat in his command chair as soldiers entered to arrest him, his face empty of all expression. Everything he had built, everything he had believed in, had crumbled in a single hour. Sithara released the psionic connection and collapsed into Marcus's arms. The effort had drained her completely. She could barely keep her eyes open. Did it work? She whispered. Marcus looked at the tactical display. Where once 3,000 enemy ships had prepared to attack, now they sat motionless. Across every communication channel, Messages of surrender and support were flooding in. "It worked," he said, tears forming in his eye. "You saved everyone." Sithara smiled weakly. Then she felt a sharp pain in her stomach. "Marcus," she gasped. "The baby. She is coming." The command staff rushed back into the room. Medical teams were summoned. In the chaos of victory, a new drama unfolded. The Empress was going into labor. 8 hours later. In a medical bay, surrounded by doctors and soldiers and officers who had followed her through hell, Sithara gave birth to a daughter. The child's eyes opened for the first time. They shifted between violet and brown, uncertain which color to be. Her skin was warm to the touch, like her father's. Her veins held a soft pink glow, a blend of human red and Volanti violet dot. She was beautiful. She was impossible. And she was theirs. Marcus held his daughter with trembling hands. This scarred soldier, who had fought and killed and lost everything, finally allowed himself to weep. Not from sorrow, but from joy. "Lyra," Sithara said softly. "Her name is Lyra." Marcus looked at the woman he loved. "Lyra," he repeated. "It is perfect." Outside the medical bay, the galaxy waited to see what would come next. But in that small room, a family had been born. And that was all that mattered. 5 years had changed everything. The purple sky above the palace was the same as it had always been. The black crystal pillars still rose toward the stars. The throne still sat at the end of the great hall, carved from the same gemstone that had held the Volanti rulers for millennia. But the empire those walls contained was no longer the one that Sithara had inherited. She stood on the royal balcony, looking out at a celebration filling the streets below. Millions of Volanti had gathered to mark the anniversary of what they now called the Awakening. The day the Empress had touched every mind in the system and shown them a new way forward. Marcus stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. The years had softened some of his scars, but his eyes still held the same steady fire. He had changed titles many times since arriving as a prisoner. Slave, guest, consort. Now he was officially known as the Emperor's Hand. Advisor to the throne and protector of the royal family. Between them stood Lyra. The child who should not have existed had grown into something wonderful. At 5 years old, she was already taller than human children twice her age. Her eyes had finally settled on a color, or rather, they had refused to settle. They shifted from violet to brown, depending on her mood, sometimes changing mid-sentence. When she became excited about something, her abilities had grown beyond anything the doctors could measure. She could speak to minds across continents before she could properly walk. She could sense emotions through walls, predict what people were about to say, and calm angry crowds with a thought. The physicians said her potential was still growing. They said she would live for thousands of years. They said things like her had never existed before and might never exist again. But to Marcus and Sithara, she was simply their daughter. A girl who loved stories about Earth animals and could never keep her room clean and always wanted to stay up past her bedtime. "The people are happy," Lyra said, watching the crowds below. Her voice was soft and musical, with hints of both her parents' accents blended together. "They have reason to be," Sithara replied. 5 years of peace. 5 years of growth. The empire is stronger now than it has been in centuries. It was true. The changes had come slowly at first. The purity laws were abolished within months of the war's end. Human slaves were freed across the empire, given the choice to return to Earth or stay and build new lives among the stars. Many chose to stay. They had formed families, built businesses, created communities that would have seemed impossible just a decade ago. Then came the bondings. Other Volanti, inspired by their empress, began seeking out human partners. The Elder Council had always taught that mixing bloodlines would weaken the species. The opposite turned out to be true. Each hybrid child born was unique, carrying abilities and potential that neither parent species possessed alone. A generation was growing up that belonged to both worlds. Children who could feel warmth and cold equally. Children who could laugh and cry and dream and hope. Children who were bridges between two species that had once been enemies. Earth itself had been transformed. The occupation was ended, but the relationship continued in a different form. Human and Volanti scientists worked together, combining their knowledge in ways that benefited everyone. Technology that would have taken humanity centuries to develop on their own was shared freely. In return, humans brought something the Volanti had forgotten: passion, creativity, the drive to explore and discover and grow. "Father," Lyra said suddenly, "tell me again about Earth." Marcus smiled. This was a familiar request. His daughter could never hear enough stories about his homeworld. "Earth is a small planet," he began, circling an ordinary yellow star. "There is nothing special about its location or its size. But what lives there is extraordinary. Humans built great cities and wrote beautiful music and told amazing stories, all without knowing that anyone else existed in the universe. And you fought to protect it," Lyra added. She knew this part by heart. "I did. And I would again." Marcus looked down at his daughter. "Protecting what you love is the most important thing anyone can do, whether it is a planet or an empire or a family." Lyra nodded seriously. Then she smiled and ran back inside the palace, chasing after a servant who had promised to bring her favorite sweets. Even with all her power, she was still a child. Sithara leaned against Marcus as they watched her go. "She will change everything," she said quietly. "Her generation will reshape what it means to be alive in this galaxy." Is that a prediction or a hope? "Both." Sithara turned to face him. Even after 5 years, his warmth still surprised her. Her own body had changed since the bonding. Her skin no longer felt as cold as it once had. Her veins had shifted from pure violet to something closer to rose. The doctor said the human genetics were slowly integrating into her system, changing her on a fundamental level. "The anniversary ceremony is in 1 hour," she reminded him. "There will be speeches. Delegations from 100 worlds are waiting to meet us. There is always something waiting." Marcus pulled her closer. "Sometimes I miss the simple days, when it was just us against the universe. Those days were terrifying, but they were ours." Sithara laughed. It was a sound she made often now, though it had been rare before she met Marcus. Laughter had seemed frivolous when she was simply an empress. Now she understood that it was essential. The ceremony took place in the great plaza below the palace. Representatives from across the empire had gathered, including many from Earth. Human delegates stood alongside Volanti nobles, their children playing together without any awareness of the hatred that had once divided their peoples. Vorath was there too, brought from his prison cell to witness what he had tried to destroy. He stood in chains at the edge of the crowd, his face empty. 5 years of imprisonment had broken something in him. He no longer ranted about purity or tradition. He simply stared at the hybrid children running through the plaza and said nothing. Sithara approached him before the ceremony began. She had not spoken to him since his arrest. Now, looking at the broken man before her, she felt something unexpected. "Pity. Do you understand now?" she asked quietly. "Do you see what we have built?" Vorath was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I see an empire that has forgotten what it was. I see a bloodline corrupted beyond repair. I see the end of everything our ancestors created. You see children playing without fear. You see families building futures together. You see hope." Sithara shook her head. "You spent your whole life trying to preserve the past. You never understood that empires must grow or die. We chose to grow. She walked away without waiting for a response. Some minds could not be changed. All she could do was build a world where people like Vorath became fewer with each generation. The ceremony began with music played by a joint human Volanthi orchestra. The sound was unlike anything either species had created alone. It blended the mathematical precision of Volanthi composition with the emotional depth of human melody. Several people in the crowd wept at its beauty. Then Sithara took the stage. She looked out at the millions gathered before her. 5 years ago, half of them would have wanted her dead. Now they looked at her with love, with respect, with hope. 5 years ago, she began, I made a choice that should have destroyed me. I bonded with a human. I carried his child. I broke every law that my ancestors had created. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. I was called a traitor, a disgrace. I was told that I had tainted the royal bloodline beyond salvation. The high priest of the Elder Council looked at me and saw only corruption. She paused and looked back at Marcus, who stood with Lyra at the edge of the stage. Their daughter waved at the crowd, and thousands of people waved back. He was wrong. Sithra's voice rang out across the plaza. My bloodline was not tainted. It was freed. For 12,000 years, the Volanthi built an empire on the belief that we were perfect, that we had reached the highest point of evolution, that there was nothing left to achieve. She stepped forward, her rose-colored veins glowing softly in the evening light. Humanity taught us that perfection is not a destination. It is a journey. There is always more to learn, more to grow, more to become. Our ancestors stopped growing because they were afraid. We chose to grow because we found something worth growing for. Lyra ran onto the stage and took her mother's hand. The crowd erupted in cheers. This is my daughter, Sithara announced proudly. She is half human, half Volanthi, and entirely the future. She carries the strength of 2 worlds in her blood. And she is not alone. Across this empire, a new generation is rising. Children who will never know the fear and hatred that divided their parents. Children who will build wonders we cannot imagine. She lifted Lyra into her arms. The child giggled, the sound carrying warmth into hearts that have been cold for centuries. My bloodline is not corrupted, Sithara declared. My bloodline is complete. And together, we will create a future worthy of both our peoples. The cheering went on for nearly an hour. When it finally faded, Sithara returned to the balcony where Marcus waited. They stood together as a family, watching the celebration continue below. You know, Marcus said quietly, I was supposed to be a trophy, a symbol of humanity's defeat. Now look at us. Now look at us, Sithara agreed. She remembered a cold throne room and a defiant human in chains. She remembered a life debt that should never have been granted to an inferior species. She remembered fear and hatred and war. But she also remembered warmth. The first time she had felt human skin against hers. The first time she had laughed without reason. The first time she had held her daughter. Do you have any regrets? She asked. Marcus considered the question seriously. I regret the lives lost, the years wasted fighting, the pain we caused and endured. He paused and smiled. But I would walk through all of it again to reach this moment. Lyra had fallen asleep in Sithra's arms, exhausted by the excitement of the day. Her eyes, half closed, shifted between violet and brown one last time before settling into rest. Marcus put his arm around his wife and daughter. The stars were coming out now, thousands of points of light representing worlds that would never be the same, because 2 people from different species had chosen love over fear. The human who tainted the bloodline, Marcus said with a grin. That is what they will call me in the history books. That is what fools will call you. Sithara leaned into his warmth. The wise will call you what you are. A father, a husband, a hero. She looked at her sleeping daughter, at the empire she had transformed, at the man who had changed everything by refusing to bow. The universe was vast and full of wonders. But the greatest wonder was this, that two beings from opposite ends of creation could find each other, could love each other, could create something more beautiful than either could have achieved alone. Humanity had been conquered as slaves. They had risen as partners. And now, through the smallest and most powerful act of all, they had become family. The Empress held her daughter close and smiled. Her bloodline was no longer cold or pure or ancient. It was warm and mixed and new. And it was exactly what the galaxy needed.